Good morning, good evening, good night, and welcome once again to AfCFTA Files. It is so good to have you with us. It is so good to enjoy these conversations, and we're back with a new topic. Today, we're talking about non-tariff barriers and the AfCFTA. As always, this is a presentation to you by the African MSME Collective, and what we do is we help MSMEs set up, stabilize, scale, and grow for sustainable success. Now, because we know 95% of all businesses are indeed MSMEs and they generate the most employment and they develop income, what we are working to do is ensure that more and more businesses in Africa are able to stand and live past the proverbial 5th to 7th birthday where most businesses fail. So if you are new to the channel, Karibuni Sana, which means welcome, welcome, welcome. And we pray that you'll enjoy this show, and we have a couple of other shows we do. We do the 360-degree brand story, which is in partnership with Akiko Stories. And we also do the Growth Edge, which is all about businesses and how to stabilize and scale. Now, we do the brand story because you have to understand who needs what you need, where they are, and then you go to them. So everything we do is enmeshed around building sustainable businesses, moving past subsistence, and growing into the space of being able to export, which is why the AfCFTA is big for us. So for those of us who've never had much about the AfCFTA, AfCFTA stands for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and it is an agreement. It is an agreement that supports the AfCFTA, but the area is the largest free trade area globally. It connects 1.3 billion people in 55 countries, who currently have, well, at the point of time of this fact, which is a couple of years ago, had a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion US dollars. It was put forth in 2012 at the 18th session of the AU. It was signed by 44 presidents on the 21st of March 2018. So you can see there's a 6-year period there where they began designing it and putting it together. Currently, 54 countries have signed the agreement, 47 have ratified, which means they've taken it through their legislative process and they've approved to be part of it, and they've deposited their instruments of trade. And then it came in force on the 30th May of 2019, and the first trading was done on January 1st, 2021. Now, if we do the AfCFTA right, as it is envisioned, it will lift 30 million Africans out of extreme poverty, boost the income of another 68 million, move our income up by 7%, increase our exports by 560 billion, and add 7 billion to the global economy. Now, one continental agreement, look at this massive impact. So it's important for us as Africans to embrace it, because the thing it's working towards is having a single market, which means we can trade across the continent without too much trouble. It's also working to help us liberalize and connect our markets. It will be the foundations of a customs union. So a customs union is like the European Union. That's a customs union. It's not a free trade area. It will promote economic growth, enhance competitiveness, put us on the map, and will push us in industrial development. Because the wealth, the income in any trading system is in the sale of manufactured goods, not the sale of raw materials. So value addition has to be our new thing. At the bottom of it, at the baseline of the AfCFTA, is to harmonize the rules of trading. How does this help? We would be trading under one trade regime. Our tariffs would be clear and open, so we'd be able to move stuff faster. It will also highlight areas of improvement, things like infrastructure development, things like collaborations we need to do, and it is built on our economic blocks. So it will establish greater cooperation within our economic blocks, but also push us to stabilize the continent. So that's what it wants to do. Why is the private sector important? Private sector has to robustly trade and test this trade agreement, and then go back to government and say, this works, this doesn't work. Because government creates the agreement, we do the trading and the testing and the stabilization. When all that is said, it is difficult to trade if we don't have seamlessness. And we all know what tariffs are. Tariff barriers are really the different tariffs different countries charge when you get to their borders. But there are things called non-tariff barriers that could stand in the way of trade. So that's what we want to discuss today. So non-tariff barriers result from prohibitions, conditions, or market requirements that make the import and export of goods difficult. So you come to a country and you find things, it's not taxes that are being levied against you. It's not charges. Non-tariff barriers are other things. You see, like you can see, like they will set some very high phytosanitary conditions, which is when you're transporting foods and plants products, or they could put in technical barriers in the place. And what these things do, they slow down the move of goods and across the borders, and they impede whether you're importing to your home country or exporting to another country. Now, non-tariff barriers often happen because our nations are trying to protect domestic industries. So they're really the variety of measures that governments and authorities put in place, which could be laws, it could be regulations, it could be policies, conditions, restrictions, specific requirements, just to ensure that they protect their domestic industries. So as an example, you could find that it is very cheap to import tomato paste, but we have a good community of tomato farmers. So what the country could do is put in a regulation that says you can only import tomatoes in this window. So it's a quota. You can only, it's almost like a quota, but you're given a specific window to import tomato paste. And then outside of that, then you can only use local tomatoes. Or the other example would be that you are in a space where you are competing very strongly with an industry the government wants to protect. So what they could do is put in regulations so that you have so many hoops to jump through that it becomes unviable for you to bring in a product. So NTBs are usually, because of it's a protectionist measure. Now, sometimes people say protectionism doesn't work. But in other instances, it's important because you find some countries have stronger economies than others. And the importing country feels that if they let this particular product through, it will challenge their ecosystem. So what are some of the common non-tariff barriers? Import bans. A nation could decide they're not importing a particular thing. A few years ago, I remember in Kenya, there was an import ban on maize. And a bit before that, there was an import ban on sugar. Because what was happening, the maize farmers in our maize growing zones were having to sell their produce at prices below market rate because the imported maize was cheaper. Okay? Now, what would make imported maize cheaper from one country to another? It could be that the country of import have subsidies so that then their cost of production is lower than the country they're exporting into, right? So then what the nation would do to protect its farmers, they would put in an import ban. Or they could decide to do quotas. So then you must use 70% local product. So then you can only import 30%. And once the 30% is imported, it's shut off. So you will not be able to get a license to bring that product in. Sometimes you find that the rules of origin, and we'll talk about rules of origin in another episode, but really the rules of origin are the determination of your product has to be this combination from this set of countries, or has to go into the product for you to get certain waivers or benefits. So countries could make their rules of origin a lot more difficult. So for instance, a country could say, whatever you import has to be not more than 40% from outside the continent. And then you're trying to bring in electronics, which is the bulk of it is from outside the continent. So that would be product-specific discriminative rules of origin. You could also have unjustified sanitary and phytosanitary conditions. So when you're exporting food, let's say you're exporting avocados, tomatoes, or something in the plant world, There are very specific phytosanitary conditions they must make. They must be disease-free, they must be blemish-free and all that. Sometimes what happens, to protect a certain product, a country could shift what their phytosanitary requirements are and make it very difficult for people to bring in different goods. They could also change the demands on packaging and labeling and other standards. So maybe the country has a Bureau of Standards who say that for export you must have X, Y, Z, and then it's a shorter list for the local companies. So by the time you as an organization goes through all the hoops to get to where they want you to get, then you find it is not economically viable to take your product across. Remember, we trade for profit, right? So everything you're trading has to make sense. It has to be economically viable for you to do that. Or they could say that maybe, like if we look at the employment law, you must have employed X number of people who are locals because they're looking to increase and improve the participation of their locals in employment. So when you look at it, it's really anything that a country can put in place to protect. Remember I said NTBs are protectionist activities. The intention of an NTB, non-tariff barrier, is to protect domestic industries. You find that they may also increase the number of licenses you must apply for and make the processes restrictive, or there could just be too many. And the idea is to get more locals to produce and fewer people to import. Other common non-tariff barriers is fixation of minimum import price. So you cannot, it will set a price ceiling or a price floor for what you can bring in. Or they'll give very specific categorizations and classifications of the product. One of the other ones that really, really affects our ability to trade as a non-tariff barrier is the binational policy. Many of us have let me use Kenya, which is my home country, buy Kenya, build Kenya. And that goes back to the push to buy local products so that local business people and artisans and producers can generate income, generate jobs, and secure the economy and improve the GDP. That's really the intention behind that policy. However, it may work against those who want to import different things because the need is low. Remember, trade is supply and demand driven. So you will supply to the place that has a higher demand. But when they put in a binational policy, it means that it is very often tied to quotas, because then there'll be a maximum amount of imports that can be brought in. So then it will make it difficult once the quota is reached. And this also could be applied on seasonal regimes. So then they could say between January and June, you can bring in these products, but between June and December, they're not acceptable, or we do not need them. So it's important for every trader looking at export trade to consistently watch what's going on in their country, they export to have sources and people who can give them the right feedback, because you have to consistently know what's going on. Another common NTB is corruption at the border or lengthy customs procedures. Now here I actually do have a story. We were in a meeting one day and of women traders, and they were explaining how you could get to the border with everything met from your side and what you know, and find that last night at the border of the other country, something changed. I'll give an example. One lady was clearing dry foodstuffs across the border, and there is a particular receipt that the customs officer in her home country said they should keep. But when she got to the other side, they were like, you were supposed to bring that one. So now it meant that she had to go back to the border of her country and work to get the document and come back. The next time that happened, she knew it was just somebody who was trying to make life a little more difficult. So she made sure she carried copies. She had copies of everything. Sometimes you find that lengthy procedures mean that fewer trucks are cleared through, So then it creates the nightmare of long lines of trucks waiting to cross the border. Lengthy procedures then affect how people are able to get across. And finally, which we don't talk about a lot, and I added this one because of just reflections we've had with a group of women, cultural practices and attitudes. And one of the most common one women traders will face is, why are you here? This is really the work of men. That's a cultural attitude. That women should be at home playing the service role, not looking to export, not looking to build big businesses. Or the expectation that you're led by a man. So when you say that you're the founder, CEO, complete control of the company, some people may have that, a little thing that triggers them. And non-tariff barriers, the cultural and practices ones, there's very little documentation of it. Because what you find is the people who experience it very rarely talk about it. Why? Is simply because it's difficult to stop sounding like you're whining and complaining. Now, in a world where we believe that women are indeed, they deserve the right to be heard and they deserve the right to trade, we must begin to systematically shift our cultural practices and attitudes, because the reality is 75% of all informal cross-border trade is done by women. So women will carry small pieces across the border. And a lot of people find that acceptable. But when it comes to moving trucks, you will find that there are some people who are like, women should really be at home or in the house, or doing, that just to shop outside, doing vegetables and that kind of stuff. So we must begin to deal with our cultural issues and all this other long list of non-tariff barriers, because these are the things that slow down trade. And the AfCFTA Secretariat actually do have a portal where you can go and report any non-tariff barriers you come across. Remember, I said that as private sector, what we do is that we robustly test the systems that government designs so that we can say useful, not useful, productive, not productive, right? So then if we're not going across and trading, if we're not researching, if we're not collecting the data, then it becomes difficult for us to actually see what the non-tariff barriers are that we have in place. So I hope this has been useful in terms of just helping you unpack the non-tariff barriers. There are some that we don't always think about, and there's like cultural practices and attitudes. And then the usual ones you think about, like corruption. However, as you think about your nation, remember that maybe the biggest source of challenges is around the fact that many of us don't understand that we can indeed not only harness the space, use the space, but we can and indeed we must give feedback to government about what is working and what's not working, so that measures can be put in place to support us as entrepreneurs. So this has been the AfCFTA Files, all about non-tariff barriers. My name is Chesubire Talitwala Grave, your host from the African MSME Collective. And I hope to see you again when we cover our next topic, which unpacks the realities of the AfCFTA and brings us to a place where we are indeed stable and we are growing as African businesses and we will thrive. See you at the next episode. Thank you.